Good morning, everyone. My name is Paloma Mayorga. I am the Development Coordinator at Big Medium. Thank you for joining us today for Coffee Chats. These talks are part of our Creative Standard program, as some of you may know, through which leaders in the creative community share their personal and professional experiences to inspire others in pursuing careers in art. I'm really excited about today's coffee chat as we welcome the one and only Annette Carlozzi. Annette is best known in Austin for being the founding modern and contemporary curator at the Blanton and as a co-leader of the Contemporary Austin's Crit Group program. Annette first came to Austin to act as the first professional curator at Laguna Gloria Art Museum, which is now the Contemporary Austin. Her experience in arts leadership is extensive, having served as director of the Aspen Art Museum, as well as the Contemporary Art Center in New Orleans. In 1996, she also served as the visual arts producer of the Olympic Games in Atlanta and has since curated numerous exhibitions, helping shape the arts landscape in Austin. She's currently working on a show at Artpace in San Antonio titled After Carolee, Tender and Fierce, in honor of the late feminist art icon Carolee Schneemann, that is scheduled to open early next year. We're so honored to have you today, Annette. How are you doing this morning?
Well, thank you, Paloma, and it's really nice to see your face. We've been corresponding over matters and not visually, so it's nice to see the person there too.
Yeah. I've actually been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. To be honest, I feel like I kind of like been manifesting this moment since we first met in Grit Group last year. And I don't know, today I thought that we could start out talking about what your experience has been like seeing the art scene develop in Austin. Like, you joined Laguna Gloria as the first professional curator, and now you're continuing to contribute to the Contemporaries programming through Crit Group. Like, what has that experience been like? And I know that's a big question.
Well, it's nice to jump in on the part of that is always central to my practice as a curator, which is the human through line. And so for me personally, and it's so weird because normally I'm asking you or other artists about their lives, and it's really not about me. So hopefully
it's all about you today.
No, I know, and we'll deal with that as we go. But no, the human part, which is that it's just lovely through line in my life that my first real curatorial gig was here in Austin at what was then called Laguna Gloria Art Museum. And now I'm on the board. And prior to that was asked to co-lead Crit Group, which is Andrea Mellard's program, now with Sterling Allen and me as co-leaders for the past 4 years. So it's lovely just to have something in your life that you start out with and is so foundational. And then as you're older and reflective and, sort of fitting a different role in the community, having another relevant place to be of service and to be active. So yeah, personally, it's really, really nice. To your first question, yeah, the art scenes are totally different.
Yeah.
When I came here, I was 25. It is an ideal community to move to when you're 25. It was then and it still is now. I had worked at the Walker Art Center as a curatorial fellow, so that was kind of the beginning of my training. And then I'd gone to the Arts Endowment in DC for a year to work again as a fellow, not yet real job. In their public art program, because public art and audience were my first loves and are indeed another kind of through line in the way that I work. And so I came here as a kid. There was a job listing for Laguna Gloria Art Museum, and I was just like, that is such a fabulous name of an institution. I may want to go there. I was just falling in love with the words. And that kind of whimsical, lyrical approach to things, I think, is another thing that I've just kind of developed over time working with artists. It was a young
how the campus feels too, like the Laguna Gloria.
Yeah,
It's just it's beautiful and it is very whimsical. And a couple of weeks ago, I actually toured the entire sculpture museum,
Yeah.
which I didn't realize it was like more down the steps.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Most down the steps. Yeah. No, there were peacocks from Mayfield Park, and there were grackles, and I'd never heard grackles at dusk every day. I mean, it was a magical, magical place, and the staff was wonderful. Lawrence Miller had hired me, and I had colleagues that remain family to this day. So it was a lovely, lively place, very small, non-collecting, really committed to this combination, which again is a through line for me and frankly has been for Lawrence too, of the local and the national or more expansive art scene. A great place for artist hangouts. We did a series called New Works that was specifically about the local artist community, and in my 7 years I did 50 artists in the New Works series, and so those people become collaborators, friends, the lens through which you see the community. My partner, who I became involved with, a few months after moving here, Tom Ziegel, became my husband, was a writer and very tied into the small press community in the state and locally. So my world as a 25-year-old, and then for 7 years was artists and writers, and that overlap and that sense of informality, and I used to call it hedonism, which Austin still has some of. Certainly the indoor-outdoor permeability, that life is not physically in a box. This is all ironic given the moment that we sit in here
True.
in boxes. But life wasn't in a box. It was moving in and out and around, and artists were active. I'll throw in the fact, and I used to quote it then, I learned it at the Arts Endowment before I moved here, and that was in those days. So I came here in '79. In those days, Austin had the 6th largest per capita population of artists and creatives in the country.
Oh, wow.
So what an interesting way to look at things. Now, their definition of creatives was not just visual artists, but all performing artists, graphic designers, architects, a broad, more expansive sense of creative as we understand it now. But still, that's what it felt like. It was a smaller town. There were no institutional facades built yet. There were no formalized organizations yet. But lots of things were beginning. A writer, Deanna Stevenson, and Rita Starpattern, a visual artist, were forming women in their work, along with Melissa Miller and Claudia Reese and other artists in the community. Sylvia Orozco and Pio Polito were starting Magic Arte, another artist-founded institution that lives to this day. The Black Arts Alliance was active, a woman named Eloise Burrell in my day, who was a performer. And years later, I found out that Valerie Cassell Oliver, who we now know as one of the leading contemporary curators in the country, worked at the Black Arts Alliance in Austin during those early years for like 5 minutes. So lots of things were seeding. The university was not, what was the Blanton then called the Huntington, was not a key player in major ways to my mind, except that Becky Duvall-Reese, who was their head of education, was curating shows by Texas artists, and they were landmark exhibitions of painting and sculpture and the beginnings of installation. I mean, this is so long ago, it's kind of crazy, but it was lively is really all I want to say, because when I came back again 10 years later, I left in '86 with my then husband, and he's a writer, so he was portable and could kind of follow me around to my work. And when we came back 10 years later, it just didn't seem, it was a more muted community. This is 1996. Texas had made its way back out of a serious kind of depression because of the oil industry. And again, it was, things didn't start to bubble up for a few years. I think it's the late 90s, 2000, before the art scene to me began to feel some vitality. And in almost all cases, I think that's because of artist-led initiatives. I'm going to pause for a second because I could just keep on going in a history lesson. That's not the point.
No, I think that that's great. I think that that's exactly like what we wanted you to bring to the coffee chat, because you have witnessed the way that the art scene has transformed over the years, and I don't know, I find that really valuable.
Yeah.
Was it your position with the Blanton that brought you back to Austin?
Yeah. At that point, I was doing that Olympic gig that you mentioned, which was the most intense job in the world. It was 3 years working for the Atlanta Committee for the Olympic Games, organizing pre-festivals, cultural festivals in the community, and then the big events, cultural events around the Olympic Games in Atlanta in the summer of '96. And I was commissioning public artworks. I was organizing exhibitions. I was a funder. I had 42 projects. It was me and 1 assistant. I had 42 projects that I was involved with, including commissioning Siah Armajani to design the first artist-designed Olympic cauldron, which turned out to be a bridge and a tower and the cauldron itself. And this amazing, amazing project for which she's not well known. And so it was super intense. And at that point, I had a child. My husband and I had a child who was about to enter 2nd grade. And I just thought, I want more balance in my life. This is amazing. And there were other kind of big opportunities that I could have gone to. And I just thought, you know what? Life balance, what a concept. This has been great. But Tom, my husband, was homesick for Austin.
Yeah.
Always knew we would come back someday. There were grandparents and cousins here for my son. And so I was looking at that. I was like, how do we get back to Austin someday? And Jesse Height, who was the director then of what was called the Huntington, became the Blanton, called me up and said, we're going to start a contemporary program here. And I know you and Tom and Danny want to move back to Austin someday. Probably not what you were thinking, but do you want to come back now and start this program? And for personal reasons, even more than professional reasons, it seemed like, that would be a great move. And that's another thing that I talk to people about when I talk to artists and mentor younger people in the field, is just trusting yourself to know that your life circumstance has to be a really, really big part of what you do. And ambitions aside, try to go for a balance of those things. In my generation, it was really rare for curators, let alone artists, to have children in addition to their career. Women couldn't do that. You couldn't balance that. And I eked by, thanks to the particular nature of the parenting that my husband and I did, the flexibility of my child, just pure will and determination. But, being able to live in my mind in an imaginary world where I had closer relationships with friends and family than in fact existed, that's a skill we have as artists and curators as well, I think. So, it's, I've lost my train of thought. I don't know. It did get me back here to Austin, that's for sure. Yeah.
Definitely. So I know that now you've since left the Blanton, and now you are working as an independent curator.
Yeah.
And I think like the burning question is like, what does that mean exactly? Like, what does a day in the life of an independent curator looks like?
Is that a burning question? I don't know.
I don't know. I think it is for me, because I have also taken on the title of independent curator, because I do curate some exhibitions, but it's not all that I do, right? So I'm really curious to know like what your days are like. I mean, right now you're working on the show for Artpace. So what can you take us like through that journey a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Quick answer to independent curator: every person that you know, yourself included, who is doing that is making it up as they go along. There is absolutely no template. There's no professional standards. There's no, we all have role models and people we admire, but we don't have those careers and they don't have ours. To me, everything starts with place and where you are and what's your context. And it also starts with body and where you are and what's your context and what's your capacity. For me, when I left the Blanton, I'd been there 18 years, which is unbelievable because prior to that, I was moving around a good bit. And I was the person who, whose address was in pencil in the address book for my friends. And then it was just like, okay, we're coming to Austin. Danny's in second grade. We're going to stay at least 10 years. And then I fell in love again and stayed for another relationship with my husband, Dan Bullock now. So I've had a couple of different lives in Austin personally as well as professionally. So it was a question when I left the institution and retired essentially from UT. And I've had colleagues, reach out and say, how do we do this? What do we do next? I don't know. I've had projects come to me, I have to say, some of them, and some of them work out and some of them don't. Writing wise, that's certainly been the case. I left with a contract with UT Press to write a big sort of history of the Texas art scene book, which is how I got my head into starting to think and reflect on this passage that I've lived in the Texas art scene. And ultimately I had to pull out of that because I had a vision issue that was going to slow down researching and writing and editing and all of that. So I was thinking that way, but no, it wasn't a book I was going to do. So I do short form writing now in different capacities. And more often than not, somebody calls me up and says, hey, do you want to write about this? The exhibition organizing, well, Crick Group has been a big chunk, which is lovely. I love mentoring. I love that I have a reason and a role with which I can continue to talk to artists and with which I can continue to talk to people, because this kind of talking to a person, and again, I'm the subject, which is weird for me, but this talking to a person and really going deep and intense on what they care about and how that manifests in their lives, that's what I do as a curator with artists. And then you hold that and you are amazingly trusted to hold that and try to help present that to the world, to an audience. So the show, particularly at Artpace, I don't know, I've had this funny thing with Linda Pace over the years. It's a small art scene in Texas and key players meet each other, I guess. And back at the beginning of Linda's founding Artpace, sort of inventing what Artpace was, I was lucky enough to be in some conversations with her and be able to be of some kind of service, both as a writer and an interviewer of artists, and then on a curatorial selection committee for some of the early seasons of artist residencies there. After I retired, it didn't take me long to realize, oh my God, I so miss, especially after these years of building the collection at the Blanton, it was like, I miss objects, who knew? I actually want to work with like wonderful works of art. How do I do that? And so I called up this time. I called up the Linda Pace Foundation and said, if you ever want somebody to do things with Linda's collection, I'd love to do a show. And so that show, Immersed, which was part of the images that float prior to our chat here, was my basically saying, can I do this? And then being given free rein to just do a show of that material, which was just glorious and was personal, and it allowed me to do something that I didn't always get to do as an institution-based curator, which is do something that I loved with kind of personal content. I realized kind of halfway through my curatorial career that the best work I did was when I tapped into something that came out of my own life. Because of course, then it's going to be more original, it's going to be authentic, and people can relate to it. So my perspective as a kid growing up in the working class and not being part of this world at all, when that floats through my choice of artists and the opportunities I can create for artists, those works feel to me to be more successful. When I think about living in community and friendship with artists, and I do exhibitions like when I did post-Katrina in New Orleans, called In Katrina's Wake, that feels stronger and better for me. I did a show called Desire at the Blanton during the years that I was single at midlife, and that's what you're thinking about, and that's how you're living. And, you know, it's like, what are artists thinking about this? And that show kind of had some authenticity. So Immersed was great. It was about trying to find myself in this new open space.
I really love what you said about allowing your life circumstance to fuel what you're doing, right, professionally, because I think that that's so, I mean, that's definitely reflective of like the passion that you have behind the projects, right? Because it's what you're experiencing, it's what you're interested in. So yeah, I really appreciate that.
You know, there has to be a space. I thought when I was young that what I was doing was making a space for working class women that were not part of, I mean, white working class women that weren't part of the art world. And, you know, if I got myself in the door, and I did, to kind of open the door for other people that were not part of the scene, wherever they came from. And that's a role that you can play. But it also seems really important in doing that, in representing what your culture is and who you see as your allies, to use that word very consciously, to be able to represent the personal challenges as well. It's like, I don't want to go there and just professionalize up and act like I'm one of that world that I've just broken into. I want to bring my world in with me. And I want to say, this is valuable. This is worthy. And so as a woman in the field, I mean, I became a museum director pretty young. I was in my early 30s, and there weren't many of them. And it was really important to say, I said at my job interview, you know, I'm probably going to want to have children in the next few years. You know, it's just like, put that on the table. Make people deal with the fact that we're full human beings and we have lives and parents and, you know, all the things that make up a human life. And so, yeah, I think that's got to be foundational. And thanks to the career I've been lucky enough to have, I feel like I can stand and say, yes, that can work, you know, insist on that. That's really important. The craziness is that it's 2020 and it still has to be said. But I do think there's a place for that advocacy still, and we're probably never going to be able to let it go and let it down. And it makes everything better. It makes, you know, the art world, which is this big, it makes the world of ideas, which is limitless. It makes the social universe, which is limitless, more expansive, more open-minded, more available to curiosity. You know, these are like human values that you have to foreground in your work. And you know that as an artist. I mean, that's what artists do. That's the very nature of what you do. It's my admiration for you that has given me the opportunity to kind of build a career out of this.
I mean, thank you so much for saying that. I'm curious, like, I guess kind of going off of that, if that was your connection to Carolee Schneemann's work, because she is all about, you know, the body, sexuality, gender.
Yeah.
So yeah, like what is your connection with her work? Because the show that you're working on now is in honor of her.
Yeah, it is. So Riley Robinson, who's the artist who was the studio manager for many, many years, more than 20 years of Artpace's history from the very beginning, is now the executive director of Artpace, which I think is fabulous. And he's doing a great job. And this is the 25th anniversary of Artpace, which is amazing. When I first started back at what became the Blanton, Artpace was a lifeline for me, because it was the one place in close proximity that was bringing international artists to the region, and I could interact and I could learn firsthand work. And I think lots of artists in this region feel the same way. You know, we went there as a place to feed and be inspired. So Riley asked me, with the 25th anniversary coming up, if I would, they're doing a big publication that I can't wait to see. And he asked if I would write the kind of introduction to it. And it was right when I was thinking, yeah, I don't want to write so much, really want to curate. So I said, you know, I think I'm going to pass, but can I make a proposal to you for an exhibition, because I've been having thoughts about the work that I'm seeing, and being in Crit Group was part of that. And I have an exhibition idea, but let me come back in a month, let's have breakfast, and I'm going to pitch the exhibition idea. Okay, fine, great, good idea. I said, I'll do it for the Hudson showroom, because those downstairs spaces are for the residencies, and I had already been involved in curatorial selection for that early on, but I'd never done a Hudson showroom show. And I came back to him and I said, what I'm seeing, well, I came back to him with the idea for this project about Carolee. I'm trying to see if I can work in the punchline of that. I'm a terrible joke teller. We had this breakfast and I got organized, which I often don't do. And I had all my notes for what the show was going to be and why I was the person that needed to organize it and why Artpace needed to show it and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, you can see I talk a lot. And so it's oh, I'm running down the whole thing. And when I was finished, Riley looked at me and smiled and he said, Annette, you had me at Carolee. And it turned out Carolee was his favorite artist that he'd ever worked with in all those years. So
incredible. And for people that don't know, Carolee Schneemann actually did a residency at Artpace in 1999.
Yeah, exactly. And she actually came there sort of adjunct to the selection panel that I was on with other curators. And so I felt connected and I got to meet her then. Yeah, she's a sort of feminist icon who, like many, was not well appreciated during her lifetime, just sort of eked out a living as a visiting artist, lots of places, and then got all these awards right before she died a couple of years ago. And so she had passed away in 2019, and that's why she was in my mind. And I was seeing work like yours, like Virginia Lee Montgomery's, in Crit Group and in the shows that I'm canvassing all the time, locally and beyond, that was about the body and its fragility. And what I wanted to put together was an exhibition that would, in a way, give homage to her, because it's at Artpace during their 25th anniversary, but tie her in a way that I have found to be really meaningful with a new generation of art makers, women all, who around the state, there are 14 artists from around the state, Texas-based female identified artists, whose work kind of is in dialogue with Carolee's legacy. Not that any one of them necessarily would say, oh, I think about Carolee Schneemann when I do my work. No, but that you can put them in dialogue and see a continuation of the conversation and a refreshed take on the conversation. So the ideas for me that are most interesting are self-portraiture and the trace of the body in that. The idea of transformation as a function of empathy. And this idea that was very present in the project that Carolee did when she was at Artpace, which was very much a memorial to her favorite cat who had just died. And the idea, as I've begun to articulate it, is this notion of communication with the multiple intelligences of the world. Obviously we're in communication with other human beings, but other living things, plant forms, animals, the dirt of the planet are all sources of knowledge / wisdom. And what was particularly interesting to me was that, Carolee was a white woman at a time of second wave feminism, and even within the history of performance art, from which her work emerges as well, this is majority at the time that it's being created, a kind of white art world. And it was really interesting to me to see people from other cultural backgrounds and traditions commenting on these same ideas, but from their points of reference. So it's okay, take it out of, this is just a really rarefied avant-garde expression from a particular period in time, the 60s and the 70s, and move it forward into, this is the world now, these are the players now, how do those ideas intersect? And so that's what the show is about.
And I think that's so beautiful that you've really thought that through, because it's, the body is it is a universal thing that we're all
Problem.
connected with, that we're constantly communicating with, and I think it's so important to have the like voices of other cultures in the show as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that that's brilliant. It's really interesting that you bring up this that you frame it in a way of like communicating or our communication with other intelligences, and I loved how you phrased that. I've been reading a bit about how like I guess the communication style of other intelligences and how we're not normally literate in those communications, you know, and how we have to like learn how to read signs of something that is hurting. And I think that that's like, it's so timely, especially with like, with everything happening with our environment and all the fires on the West Coast. So it's so important to have those communication receptors open and for us to listen. And I'm so excited for the show at Artpace for that reason.
Thanks. I hope that, you know, isolating that as a notion that all of you artists present in your own ways allows us to see as well a different, more expansive valence for human communication. Because we're screwed up there too, you know. I mean, there's so much blocked there too, and I always feel that it's the affinities and adjacencies that are right there, you know, that are just right for contemplation, exploration, understanding. Again, words that artists use as your active verbs, but I think curators can pose these as questions to a public as well. I mean, yeah, thanks. I can't wait to see your work. And I'm really excited that you've been able to do some new things. I mean, the whole process in Crit Group of the past, you know, how many months has this been? 6, 7 months. And then the previous ones has been, you know, how do people ratchet back up again to being able to make work when we're living in this kind of pressure, every kind of pressure. And so I'm thrilled that you've got some new work that we can include in the show too.
Oh, thank you. So actually that kind of leads me into my next question, which is, well, first I have to say, like, something that I truly admire about you and your work is the way that you were able to just so eloquently express like all that you're feeling when you see a work of art. And in thinking about like our conversations from Crit Group last year, and even with like the Austin studio tour coming up, like having that in mind, like, do you have any tips or advice on like how to lead a meaningful conversation with artists for everybody listening?
Yeah, I wish there was a recipe for that. It's different for every artist.
Down though.
Well, yeah, but I've done it for a lifetime. I mean, can you imagine how many studio visits I've done? I mean, it's thousands. And that's been such a privilege. I mean, to literally get paid to do this as work is amazing to me. And not anything I take for granted, I have to say. I'm grateful for it. So yeah, you go to a studio and you're not a curator and you're not an artist, and let's say curators and artists do know how to have those conversations, except I know for a point of fact they actually don't. But you go and you're a visitor to the big mediums, you know, East, West, Open Studio Tour. It's like, don't be intimidated. It is two human beings talking. Try to isolate the artist from the hubbub of everything going around. Try to have a direct encounter. It's a human to human thing, not to beat a dead horse, but if I don't come to you and your art as a human being with my heart open and my mind open, I'm gonna miss half of it, or I'm gonna walk away not transformed. And if I do come with that, I am going to walk away transformed. That's what people love about art when it really works. So that's what you want. Hard to describe the mechanisms to put it in motion, but it's respect, it's curiosity, it's acknowledging who you are. I mean, when I have studio visits with artists, and I had a project for the Olympics where I did 250 studio visits across the Southeast. Literally like dropping in from a plane, getting a rental car, driving out to the country to a farm, and I'd have 2 hours with that person and then have to leave and make a decision about, am I going to include that person in a show? It was research for a show. So really cold, just cold, and everybody's nervous, you know. So I always start not self-forward, but if the artist, in talking about what they do, hits on something that you can relate to, then share that short human story. And then you have a human connection, and then it's no longer strangers talking about something. What I always understand is that an artist's art is the thing they care about the most in their lives. And it's this hugely complex conceptual process to take that care, those ideas, those feelings, those interests, and transfer them into this thing or this performance or this activity that someone can share. And so it needs a lot of respect, a lot of delicacy, but openness and humor. And, you know, it sounds big, but then you don't want to make it like so big that it's intimidating. I don't know, curiosity. You see something behind you. I see what's on your windowsill there. I ask you, why is that a special thing to you? You know, just, I mean, everybody's interesting, right? You can, I'm a firm believer in this. You can talk to anybody. I'm a shy person and I can talk to anybody because you just have to go up to them and ask a question or see a thing in their life and say, wow, why that? And you start a conversation that way. It doesn't matter that you don't know what the material is and you don't know what to call that thing. And, you know, those things don't matter. It's the interest that is the through line. It's the curiosity and the care that is the through line of that conversation. It's not the jargon or the terminology or the knowledge.
I really love that. I'm thinking about like my experience in Crit Group and how, you know, we would take like the first like 5 or 10 minutes to just simply like sit in quiet and look at the piece and take it in and you know, formulate your thoughts, and then we would talk about it. So I think that that's like a really invaluable process as well. And I know that for the Austin Studio Tour, it won't be so much like seeing the artist in person, but we're hoping that people will, you know, sign up to do like studio visits on Zoom and, you know, just like one-on-one conversations with people virtually. So yeah, can you maybe talk a little bit about your experience doing, have you done studio visits virtually? Because the last one that we did, like you came over, but
Yeah.
so, you know, it's still, the human connection maybe is a little bit easier when it's in person.
Yeah, I will. Let me pick up on one thought though that of something that you said, and it does come out of Crit Group, and it's something that's always really interested me professionally, and that is that there are kind of infinite languages about art. I taught a class once at UT, a graduate seminar, about all the languages of contemporary art, that you have this work of art in the middle, and the artist talks about it in a certain way. And the curator uses a certain kind of question asking and vocabulary, and the critic uses another one, and the educator uses another one, and the historian uses another one, and the general public and the docents come at it from another perspective. You know, it's this idea that everything is permissible, and it goes back to, again, you know, step back, zoom out to that larger conversation about the affinities and the connectivity between and among things. It's like the words shouldn't get in the way. Spit the words out, whatever they are. They start it. And that's what Crit Group is like. I love Crit Group because it's mostly artists talking together about work. And then Andrea Mellard and I talking in our own languages. And, you know, there are just lots of ways. Like some people are interested in the way it's made and the material. And, you know, I'm always going to talk about society and the world and some ridiculous abstract idea that describes the biggest context. And I see Virginia Lee's on the chat there. Somebody's going to bring in physics and or science, and you know. So anyway, all of that is open. So have I done Zoom studio visits? We have talked about doing that in Crit Group. There's one artist, Sean Ripple, who works with technology, and so we've done it for him. We have another artist in this year's class, Michael, who's just moved to LA in the midst of all of this, and so we're doing that. But we finished his crits before he left. So no, I haven't done a lot of it. But I told somebody recently, we were talking about creating a program, in another setting, and they were talking about, well, let's get everybody together, socially distanced, and everybody can be 10 feet apart, and the speaker can be, like down here 30 feet out. And I said, can I just share my recent observation, which is that, this is just me, but I'm actually liking Zoom now. Like, I can see your face, I can see a context around you, that kind of intimacy. You know, we're hardwired to do it the other way we always did as human beings in a public world, but now I can feel the change happening, and I don't mind doing it this way. And we in the art world always said, you know, as digital imagery became part of our landscape, we always said, oh, it's going to be terrible because people aren't going to have contact with the real object. Well, yeah, but just like all technology, it's a tool, and you just have to learn which stage of that transaction you use it for effectively, and it's going to be trial and error for a while. But I would think for anybody that gets excited about an artist from, you know, what are you calling it? East West? What is it being called?
So the Austin Studio Tour this year.
Austin
We're merging.
Sounds so generic, but okay, Austin
Yeah.
Studio Tour. But, you know, when you do that, I would think, you know, people are looking at it however they're looking at it. And yeah, oh, wow, I'm going to make an appointment now to follow up with that and have, you know, this conversation, whatever it is. And I think the one thing I would say is that the artists may have to understand a little differently that, it's weird, I'm going to relate it to this because I always build relationships between things, but you know, it's like you looking at me and asking me the questions now. It's like if somebody comes to you on Zoom, address them as who they seem to be and ask them some questions too, so that it becomes a back and forth as opposed to I'm giving a lecture on Zoom, she says, using lots of words and taking up all the talk space. But that idea of exchange, we're all still learning how to do that on Zoom, and you know, just go in knowing that.
Totally. And for artists listening in, we are trying to tailor our creative standard coffee chats and our creative standard workshops, I'm sorry, to tackle some of these things that might be like impediments for you to want to show your work or have studio visits online and whatnot. Like we have a workshop next week with Fumio Gunro on how to market yourself on social media as an artist. So things like that to help like ease that, which, you know, I know that I mean, it's going to be a very different tour this year. So I think that like it kind of, I mean, tying it back to what you were saying earlier about like these communication styles, right? Like we have to learn and adapt and I don't know, do the best to communicate.
Yeah, you know, everybody's in it together. Nobody really knows what they're doing right now, so that's okay. I actually think that's actually not a bad place to start from, because again, this idea that people seem to have that they need to be an expert to understand art, you know, it's like, no, you know, level playing field right now. Nobody knows what they're doing. We're all trying to figure out ways to connect and to communicate. And if we can understand that equivalence, number one, it builds into the brain's awareness that we are actually living in a lateral world and not a hierarchical one, and that's like good knowledge to have. But secondly, it just puts people more in relationship as opposed to in an up-down hierarchical structure, and that's going to be better, I think.
Totally. And actually, that's also a really good segue. I wanted to invite people to drop any questions that you might have for Annette into the Q&A box. And while you guys do that, I just wanted to go back to a comment actually that Kelly Grajeda dropped in the chat. And she said, I think the role and contributions of independent curators in community healing, representation, and transformative change will continue to be more and more valuable. I think that that's such a beautiful sentiment, and I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. That's really lovely. I love that you were saying that you are starting to curate now or have been curating now. For me, I'm always really interested in and have tried to encourage artists curating. It's a little different from when people trained as curators curate, or historians or critics curate. I mean, again, it just adds to the breadth and depth of what you can experience by looking at art in an exhibition or a performance. Yeah, I think I like that she highlighted the idea of healing here, because I think as all human beings, we have to be more cognizant of that right now. That's all we're going to be moving into now. This is going to be a period, however long it lasts, of reconciliation and healing. And art can help us do that. You know, I mean, for me, art was always about social and political change. And that was my idea. And, you know, I look back at my career and think, yeah, did I really make that happen? Should I have, you know, gone into law or something? I mean, should I have done something more consequential with that intention? But there's no question that doing this now has meaning. There's no question that the art that artists make, whoever they are, whatever their medium, whatever their means of presentation, and that's all changing now. This is something we need in the world, to remember how to be human, because our specific culture in the United States right now is attacking that right now, and the world as a whole is under siege because of the consequences of our actions. So it's really important to try to stress that human healing aspect of things. And I am like, you know, until I became an old lady, I was a very testosterone forward, tough kind of thinker. And it's a little odd for me to be taking on this very nurturing kind of notion, but it's just really clear that that's what is needed. So.
Totally. And I find that idea of like nurturing and you know, tied in with mentorship and actually Ashley Blazer in our Q&A box asked, how would you recommend a young artist who is new to Austin get plugged into the local community and connect with a mentor like yourself?
Oh, well, yeah. I think, you know, the Austin Open Studios is great because it's the largest network you're going to be able to be part of. I mean, what you guys do at Big Medium is vast and inclusive and public and connected to audience and building audiences. So definitely start there. I find, you know, I'm every day tapping into some Zoom somewhere in the world. That's the lovely thing about Zoom now. And I'm learning things, I'm learning about people. It's not likely that one can connect physically with a mentor who can give any you what you wants or thinks they need. Those, you know, it's just hard right now. But you can learn from conversations, you know, like the ones you guys do on coffee chats or any kind of programs. Fun aside, tonight I'm going to tune into a Zoom that the Perez Art Museum, which is the public contemporary art museum in Miami, Florida, is doing. Franklin Sermons, who's a curatorial colleague, who's the director of the museum, is talking with George Clinton, the musician, George Clinton of P-Funk and the Funkadelics, about back in the 60s and 70s, and that's when I first began to engage with that work. He was a musician working with other performing artists, building sets, creating costumes, working in a way that cuts across all disciplines. And the visual art world, the museum world, is only just starting to look at that and say, oh, wow, that needs to be part of the story too. So what a great thing. I mean, I just have to like sit in my house and bring up the Zoom to learn that. It's not mentorship per se, but it's inspiration. And I know it's going to feed me. So those kinds of things, they're just so available now. It's amazing.
And in terms of in terms of mentorship, as an artist, I can definitely say that like applying to exhibitions that are juried are a really excellent way of connecting with curators and with other professionals in the arts. And you never know like what is gonna come of it. For instance, like I applied before I worked at Big Medium, to the Tito's Prize exhibition, which is where Andrea Millard saw my work and then invited me to apply to Crit Group, which is like how I met you. So really like taking advantage of those open calls is really important. And I think somebody asked like is there any specific tips on involvement with Crit Group application success? And to answer that really quick, with creative standard, like we do have talks on how to, as an artist, like be, or work on your, what am I trying to say?
Your presentations
Yeah,
and
the
yeah,
presentation and
professional presentation. Yeah.
definitely. So, you know, look through our archive of creative standard workshops. Like we have a lot of really good resources there. And yeah, so that's just a little bit.
Yeah.
We do have a lot of questions and not too much time. So let me see. Let me go back a little bit. Oh, this is a really good question from Laura August. How do we build functional systems of care with the curatorial and artistic communities we move into? Where do you see that work happening? And I think that she's talking about the healing role that curatorial work can have.
Hey, Laura. Laura's a dear friend. I just took a class with Laura that was offered through Clay Houston. It was digital, it was online, called Mud and What It Makes. And it explored mud and transformations of mud, both as a material and as a metaphor. And I took it both because I can't ever get enough of Laura's language about art, but also because I wanted to move into a more visceral understanding of mud, because I knew that that visceral understanding would help inform my language about the After Carolee show. So connections always. Laura, thanks for a great question. I think the first thing we have to do, and there's really no limitation on this right now, is we have to imagine that. And we have to get together in groups of like-minded people, and I don't care if the skill sets are the same, better if they're not, to sort of share what the imagination of that looks like. I mean, it's obviously too early to start building something. I feel like, just like calling my exhibition Tender and Fierce, I feel like, oh, things are so vulnerable, I wouldn't put anything out there quite yet. But I think maybe we use this time, as it has been a time of reflection and learning, to jointly imagine. And then the question is, okay, who do you want to be in your thought circle? You know, who can you get access to? And if you come up with something really great, how do you make that public so that more people can think about it and give input into it? I mean, that's the kind of system I see possible right now, and maybe more possible right now, because we have fewer of the kinds of commitments and distractions of kind of logistical connection. So that's a quick answer to a really deep question. Thanks.
Yeah. Sono Osato, you know, is concerned about like seeing art through our screens and through, he calls it digital intervention. You know, that you lose a lot of like detail and a bit like of that connection. But I kind of want to say like, it's like, I mean, it's all temporary, right? Like looking at art through screens will hopefully be temporary. And I think that like making the best of all of these resources, like you said, if you've taken like all of these different classes or attended lectures on Zoom, and taking advantage of this moment in that way. And then, and I guess identifying artists online that you want to connect with and reaching out, and maybe down the line, like we'll be able to experience art in person again. And I mean, a lot of art galleries are opening by appointment only, so there's still, you know, some ways of connecting physically with the artwork. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you have anything to say to that.
No, I can mourn the hopefully temporary loss of that proximity for sure. With the question asker, it is, you know, the images of the Immersion show that may or may not have been seen by anybody here at the beginning of this presentation. It was meant to be experienced in the full, in the round. You were meant to have a sense of, you know, being in a space and feeling the negative space around you, as well as the works of art floating in it. And I've struggled with that of all this during all this time of carrying the After Carolee show, which, you know, I started working on literally a year ago.
Yeah.
Got the artists into in early 2020, just kind of carrying it, moving it along thought-wise. And it's very hard to consider it as a show that people will have to make an appointment to go see, and there won't be very many people. And There's not a catalog, so it doesn't live in that way, and it doesn't need to. It's about being in proximity. So I get it. My way of understanding art comes as much to my physical understanding, my kinesthetic and bodily understanding of it, you know. So I get what he's missing there, but yeah, hopefully this is temporary. It won't be temporary in the sense that having learned this skill, it's not the optimal way, but it will stick around. I mean, it was already part of the marketplace, and I don't usually speak with expertise to the marketplace, but certainly galleries were selling work through digital imagery for 10 years now, at least, as a sort of major avenue. So it's going to be around. I guess the challenge, and it goes back to the earlier questions, is how do we make it more immediate?
And so we are almost out of time, so I just wanted to address one last question. And Carter Watkins says that you know, he wants to write something interesting, and is there a place that I can, or that he can read some of your essays and or other reading suggestions you may have?
Oh, that's so nice. Short answer, no. So much of my career was spent pre-internet and digital media that almost all my early stuff is out of print, and you know, you'd have to like go to a library to see things. I recently, I don't know if it's up on their website yet, the most recent thing I wrote was for Conspirari, which is a choral group in town, and they were doing a new CD that featured women's voices, and they knew that some of the time I write kind of from a place of sensation, and so I wrote reflection essay for them, and I think it's going to be posted on the web at conspirari.org under the singing guitar. I don't know if it's there yet or not. There will be stuff on the website at Artpace in January for our show after Carolee, Tender and Fierce. I don't know. Sometimes I write for Sightlines. Jean Claire will call me up and say, hey, you want to write about this? I'm more of a in the moment talker than I am leave a written trace of these ideas for good or for bad. That's how it works. But thank you for asking.
Yeah. Well, I think that is time. Thank you to everyone who tuned in today, and thank you so much, Annette, for taking a part in our coffee chats and sharing your thoughts and expertise with us. It's been really an insightful conversation with you.
Totally my pleasure. Thanks, Paloma, and I'm so glad Coca thought this would be fun to witness, and I'm so glad I got to do the conversation with you. So thanks for your care and interest. And thanks to everybody who asked questions. I haven't seen them yet, but I look forward to it.
Yeah, we'll be downloading all the questions to send to Annette so she can take a look as well. I know that there were several questions that I didn't get to answer, but thank you everyone for contributing. So please be sure to keep an eye out for After Carolee at Artpace early next year. And also the Crit Group exhibition will be opening in November at Grey Duck Gallery here in town. Be sure to also check out our open call for the Austin Studio Tour and find out how you can participate this year. And we have our Creative Standard Workshop next week with Fumio Gunro. Our Creative Standard Workshop, and our coffee chat will be with painter Camille Blitz next week. Lastly, in case you haven't heard, we do have a new exhibit at the Big Medium Gallery featuring the work of Taylor Barnes, which you can see by appointment only Thursday through Saturday, 12 to 6 p.m. And you can schedule your appointment at bigmedium.org. Thank you again, Annette, and we'll see everyone next week.
Great. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.